I didn't have anyone to spend Christmas with this year, no wife, no kids, and I hadn't spoken to my family in years. So I figured I'd make the best of it and rented a cabin deep in the Appalachians. I thought some solitude might do me good. No city noise, no people, just snow-covered woods and a fire. I got there Christmas Eve, just before sunset. The place was simple small living room, a wood stove, and a big window looking out onto the pines. It felt peaceful. I even caught myself smiling as I built a fire and settled in with a drink. The first few hours were uneventful. I cooked some dinner, stared into the fire, and tried to enjoy the quiet. Around 9 p.m., I stepped out onto the porch for a cigarette. The snow was falling steadily, muffling the world around me. It was almost too quiet. No wind, no animals, just this heavy silence. That's when I noticed it. Something moved between the trees, about 50 yards out. At first, I thought it was a deer, but it was too tall. It moved slowly, deliberately, weaving between the trunks like it was watching me. I stared at it, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. My gut told me it wasn't right, but my brain fought back with reason. Maybe it was just a shadow, or a trick of the light. I crushed my cigarette and went back inside, bolting the door behind me. I tried to shake the unease, but it lingered. The cabin, which had felt cozy an hour ago, now felt stifling. The big window seemed too exposed, like something or someone could be watching. I didn't sleep. I sat there by the fire until dawn, poker in hand, heart racing at every creak or gust of wind. When daylight finally came, I worked up the nerve to look outside. The porch was empty, but the snow told a different story. Footprints led from the tree line to the porch. They weren't human. The toes were too long, the shape too strange, and they circled the cabin, stopping by the window where I'd been sleeping. I didn't wait to figure out what made them. I packed my bag, threw on my coat, and got out of there as fast as my car could handle the icy road. I didn't tell anyone what happened. Who would believe me? But I'll tell you this, I won't ever spend Christmas alone in the woods again. I thought Christmas would be easier this year. No family, no friends, no expectations, just me, a quiet evening, and a cheap bottle of whiskey in my little rental house at the edge of town. I'd told myself I didn't mind being alone. I'd stopped pretending to care about the holidays a long time ago. All the lights, the music, the cheerful families, it just reminded me of what I didn't have. It was around 10 p.m. on Christmas Eve when the knock came. I was sitting on the couch, staring at the tree I'd put up out of some half-hearted attempt to feel festive, when I heard it. Knock, knock. It startled me. My house sits on the outskirts of town, practically in the woods. I don't get visitors, especially not at that hour, in the middle of a snowstorm. For a moment I thought I'd imagined it, but then it came again. Knock, knock, knock. I got up and moved cautiously toward the door, the whiskey warming my veins but not dulling my unease. "Who is it?" I called, my voice steadier than I felt. No answer. I glanced through the peephole. A man stood on my porch, his head down, his shoulders hunched against the wind. He wasn't dressed for the weather, just a thin jacket and no hat, no gloves. Snow clung to his hair and beard. "Can I help you?" I asked, not opening the door. He looked up then, and even through the peephole, I didn't like the way he smiled. Too wide, too forced.
"Car broke down,"
he said. His voice was muffled by the wind.
"Been walking a while. Can I come in?"
Something about him didn't sit right with me. He wasn't slurring, didn't seem drunk, but there was a strange intensity in his eyes, even through the distorting glass. "I can call someone for you," I offered, my hand tightening on the doorknob. "No service," he said flatly. "Phone's dead. I just need to warm up." I hesitated. It was freezing outside, and the nearest gas station was miles away. If he was telling the truth, I'd be condemning him to freeze. But my gut told me to keep the door shut. "There's a diner about 2 miles back," I said. "They're open all night." His smile faltered. "Come on, man. It's Christmas." Something about the way he said it. The sharpness under the words sent a chill down my spine. "Sorry," I said, my voice firmer now. "I can't help you." For a moment, he just stood there staring at the door. Then he stepped back, his smile returning, though it didn't reach his eyes. "Suit yourself," he said, turning and walking off the porch. I waited, listening to the crunch of his footsteps in the snow. They faded into the distance, and eventually all I could hear was the wind. I tried to shake it off, but I couldn't. Something about him stuck with me, gnawed at the edges of my mind. I double-checked the locks and drew the curtains, but the sense of unease lingered. Around midnight, I was still awake, sitting in the living room with the lights off. The only illumination came from the Christmas tree, its soft glow casting long shadows across the walls. Then I heard it again. Knock, knock, knock. It was softer this time, almost hesitant, but it sent my heart racing all the same. I crept to the door and peeked through the curtain. The porch was empty. My breath fogged the glass as I stared out into the night. The snow had stopped, and the moonlight reflected off the fresh powder, making everything look sharper, clearer. I scanned the yard, the edge of the woods, the road beyond. Nothing. Just as I was about to turn away, I saw them. Footprints in the snow. They led from the road to my porch, but there were no tracks leading away. Panic clawed at my chest. I checked the locks again, grabbed the biggest knife I could find from the kitchen, and sat in the corner of the living room, my back to the wall, where I could see both the door and the window. The house felt too quiet. Every creak of the old wood, every groan of the wind made me flinch. I stayed like that for what felt like hours, clutching the knife, my ears straining for any sound. Just when I thought maybe, just maybe I was safe, the power went out. The Christmas tree went dark, plunging the room into shadow. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. The only light now came from the faint glow of the moon through the curtains. And that's when I heard it. Not a knock this time, a scratch. Soft, deliberate, right at the edge of the window. My blood ran cold. Slowly, I turned my head, my eyes locked on the thin sliver of moonlight seeping through the curtain. A shadow passed in front of it. I didn't wait. I bolted for the bedroom, locking the door behind me and shoving the dresser in front of it for good measure. I sat there in the dark, my back against the wall, the knife still in my hand, and waited. The scratching moved around the house from one window to the next, then back to the front door. Then, just as suddenly as it started, it stopped. When the sun finally came up, I mustered the courage to leave the bedroom. My hands were shaking as I moved the dresser and unlatched the door. The house was empty, but outside the snow told a different story. Footprints circled the house, over and over, crisscrossing back and forth like whoever made them had been pacing all night. I followed them to the edge of the woods, where they disappeared into the trees. I don't know who or what was out there that night. All I know is, I'm never spending Christmas alone again. Christmas Eve always made me feel hollow. The lights, the music, the cheer. It all felt like a cruel reminder that I had no one to share it with. No family, no friends, just me and my fading hope that things might change. This year I decided to drive, not to anywhere specific, just away. I thought maybe the open road would make me feel less stuck. It was cold, snow had been falling all afternoon, and the roads were getting slick. But I didn't care. I kept driving. I was somewhere deep in the mountains, the kind of stretch where the nearest gas station might be 40 miles away, when I saw him, a man standing on the shoulder of the road. He was tall and skinny with a ratty coat that hung off his frame like it barely fit. His hands were stuffed into his pockets, and his face was hidden by the brim of a baseball cap. The snow was falling heavier now, and he just stood there, motionless, as my car approached. I slowed down, more out of instinct than anything. What was he doing out here in the middle of nowhere? There were no houses, no cars, nothing. Just the woods and the road. As I pulled up beside him, I rolled down my window a crack. "You okay?" I called out. The man turned his head slowly toward me, but he didn't answer. "You need a ride?" I tried again. For a long moment, he just stared. Then, without a word, he nodded and walked toward the passenger door. Something about him made me uneasy, but I told myself it was just the situation. It's not every day you see someone out in the middle of nowhere like that. Still, when he climbed into the car, I couldn't shake the sense that I'd made a mistake. He didn't smell like booze or drugs, just wet wool and cigarettes. His face was gaunt, his cheeks hollow, and there was something off about his eyes. They were sharp, almost predatory, but completely empty at the same time. "Thanks," he muttered, barely loud enough to hear. His voice was gravelly, like he hadn't used it in a while. "No problem," I said, gripping the wheel tighter than I needed to. "Where you headed?" "Just up the road." That wasn't much of an answer, but I didn't press him. The silence that followed felt heavy, almost oppressive. The only sounds were the hum of the heater and the crunch of my tires on the snow-covered road. After a few miles, he finally spoke again. "You got any family?" The question caught me off guard. No," I said. "Not anymore." He nodded like he already knew the answer. "Must be nice," he said quietly. I didn't know what to say to that, so I stayed silent. The tension in the car kept building. Every so often, I'd glance at him out of the corner of my eye. He was sitting stiffly, staring straight ahead, his hands still buried in his coat pockets. Then I noticed something that made my stomach drop. His feet. They were bare. No boots, no shoes, just pale, bony feet dusted with melting snow. "You okay, man?" I asked, trying to sound calm. He didn't answer. I tried again. "You sure you don't need me to take you to a hospital or something? It's freezing out there." Still nothing. I kept driving, my pulse thundering in my ears. My gut told me to get this guy out of my car, but the snow was coming down harder now, and I couldn't just kick him out in the middle of a storm. That's when I noticed him moving. At first, it was subtle, a shift of his weight, a twitch of his fingers. Then slowly, he pulled his right hand out of his pocket. I caught a glimpse of something shiny. "Pull over," he said, his voice low and calm. "What?" I stammered. "Pull over," he repeated, more firmly this time. My mind raced. My first thought was to floor it, but with the snow piling up, there was no way I could outrun him if I slid off the road. "Look," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I don't have any money. You can check my wallet if you want. Just..." "Stop the car," he snapped, cutting me off. I slowed down, but not because I wanted to. The road ahead curved sharply, and I didn't trust myself to navigate it at speed. As the car crawled to a stop, I felt my heartbeat in my throat. "Turn it off," he said. I hesitated, but when he raised the knife just slightly, I did as he asked. The engine died, and for a moment, the world was eerily quiet. "Get out," he said. "What?" "Out, now." My hands trembled as I unbuckled my seatbelt and pushed the door open. The cold hit me like a slap to the face, but I barely noticed. "Walk," he said, gesturing toward the woods with the knife. I stepped into the snow, my mind racing for a way out of this. The road was deserted, and even if someone came by, they'd never see me through the trees. "Move," he barked. I stumbled toward the tree line, the snow crunching beneath my boots. My breath came in short, panicked gasps, fogging the air in front of me. Then out of nowhere, I heard it, the faint rumble of an engine. A pair of headlights cut through the snow, and my would-be attacker froze. "Help!" I screamed, waving my arms frantically. The car screeched to a stop, and the driver, a burly guy in a plaid jacket, jumped out. "What the hell's going on here?" he yelled. The man with the knife hesitated for a split second before bolting into the woods. I told the driver everything, barely able to get the words out through my shivering. He called the police, and we waited together until they arrived. They searched the woods but didn't find him. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face. Those empty eyes staring back at me. I don't know what his plan was. Maybe to rob me. Maybe worse. But one thing's for sure. I won't ever forget the way he looked, standing there in the snow, barefoot and calm, like he'd done this before.